The story begins on a deserted stretch of highway in the early hours of the morning. The sky is still dark, with the first light of dawn just starting to break on the horizon. Rick Thompson is behind the wheel of his 18-wheeler, driving through the vast, empty landscape. The road ahead is long and straight, flanked by thick woods on either side. His truck's cab is cluttered with the essentials of a life lived on the road: a thermos of coffee, an old atlas, and a well-worn CB radio. Rick is on his way to deliver a load to a small town up north, a route he's driven countless times before. The monotonous hum of the engine and the rhythmic passing of the mile markers lull him into a state of focused calm. His mind drifts to the past, thoughts of his ex-wife and the children he rarely sees, but he shakes them off, focusing instead on the road ahead. As the first rays of sunlight pierce through the trees, Rick spots something unusual on the side of the highway. Slowing down, he sees an old, ornate mirror propped up against a tree, its surface gleaming eerily in the dim light. Curious, he pulls over to take a closer look. The mirror is large, with an intricately carved wooden frame that looks out of place in the middle of nowhere. Despite its age, the glass is spotless, reflecting the surrounding trees with an unnatural clarity. Rick feels an inexplicable pull towards the mirror, a strange compulsion that overrides his usual skepticism. He decides to take it with him, thinking it might be worth something, or at the very least, make for an interesting conversation piece. He carefully loads it into the back of his truck, securing it against the side wall. With the mirror safely stowed, Rick gets back on the road. As he drives, he can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. The truck's cabin feels colder, and the shadows inside seem to stretch and move in ways they shouldn't. Dismissing it as fatigue, Rick turns up the radio and focuses on the drive ahead. As the hours pass, Rick's unease grows. The mirror in the back of his truck seems to take on a life of its own. He begins to hear strange noises, soft whispers and faint scratching sounds coming from the trailer. At first, he chalks it up to the creaking of the truck or the wind outside, but the noises become more persistent, more deliberate. Curiosity and a growing sense of dread compel Rick to check the mirror at his next stop. Pulling into a rest area, he climbs into the back of the truck to inspect it. As he approaches, the air around him grows noticeably colder, and his breath fogs in the frigid air. The mirror stands where he left it, but now its surface seems to shimmer and pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. When Rick looks into the mirror, he sees something impossible. His reflection isn't alone. Behind him, standing just out of sight, is a shadowy figure. Startled, he spins around, but the trailer is empty. He looks back at the mirror, and the figure is still there, its form becoming clearer. It's a man, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. The figure's presence is suffocating, and Rick feels an overwhelming sense of dread. Panicked, Rick slams the trailer door shut and rushes back to the driver's seat. He tries to rationalize what he saw, blaming it on exhaustion or a trick of the light, but deep down he knows something is terribly wrong. As he pulls back onto the highway, the truck feels heavier, the engine straining under an invisible burden. The drive becomes a waking nightmare. The mirror begins to show Rick scenes that shouldn't be possible. He sees roads that twist and contort in impossible ways, landscapes that shift and change before his eyes, and the shadowy figure, always lurking just out of reach. The figure begins to appear more frequently, sometimes in the passenger seat next to him, sometimes reflected in the rearview mirror, always grinning that malevolent grin. Rick tries to rid himself of the mirror, pulling over to the side of the road and attempting to dump it. But every time he opens the trailer door, the mirror is there, unmoved. The figure in the reflection seems to mock him, its presence growing stronger and more malevolent with each passing mile. In a moment of desperation, Rick smashes the mirror with a tire iron, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. But instead of relief, he feels a wave of nausea and fear wash over him. The shards of glass begin to move, reassembling themselves with a life of their own. Within moments, the mirror is whole again, and the shadowy figure's grin has widened. The situation escalates as Rick's reality starts to unravel. The road ahead twists and warps, the landscape around him becoming increasingly surreal and nightmarish. Time seems to lose all meaning. Night turns to day in the blink of an eye, and the familiar landmarks are replaced by alien, distorted terrain. The truck itself seems to be under the mirror's control, the steering wheel and brakes responding sluggishly as if fighting against him. The shadowy figure begins to appear outside of the mirror now, manifesting in the cabin of the truck, sitting in the passenger seat, or standing by the roadside, always watching him. Rick's mind teeters on the edge of sanity as he tries to maintain control of the truck while also escaping the figure's relentless pursuit. In a desperate bid to free himself from the mirror's curse, Rick decides to drive to the nearest town, hoping to find help or at least some answers. But as he drives, the road stretches endlessly before him, leading nowhere. The world outside the truck becomes a twisted reflection of his fears and regrets. He sees visions of his ex-wife and children, their faces twisted in sorrow and anger, blaming him for abandoning them. The final confrontation comes when Rick's truck is forced to a stop in front of a desolate, abandoned house that appears suddenly on the side of the road. The house is eerily familiar, its broken windows and crumbling facade reflecting a life left behind. Rick realizes with horror that it's the house he used to share with his family, now decayed and forgotten. The shadowy figure appears in the doorway, beckoning Rick inside. He knows that entering the house means facing the truth he's been running from, but he also knows that the only way to break the mirror's curse is to confront whatever lies within. Summoning all his courage, Rick steps out of the truck and walks toward the house. Inside, the air is thick with the stench of decay. The walls are lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different aspect of Rick's life, his failures, his regrets, and the faces of those he's hurt. The shadowy figure stands at the center of the room, now fully formed, its face a distorted version of Rick's own. The figure reveals itself to be a manifestation of Rick's guilt and the darkness he's tried to bury. It taunts him, showing him scenes from his past that he's tried to forget. The arguments with his wife, the nights spent on the road instead of at home, the moments he chose work over family. The figure offers Rick a choice: embrace the darkness and remain trapped in this twisted reality, or confront his past and break free. In a moment of clarity, Rick understands that the mirror is a reflection of his soul, twisted by years of denial and regret. He knows that to escape its curse, he must let go of the past and forgive himself. With a surge of determination, he faces the shadowy figure, acknowledging his mistakes and accepting the consequences of his actions. The figure's grin fades, and the mirrors around the room begin to crack and shatter. The house starts to crumble, the walls collapsing inward as the darkness recedes. Rick feels the weight lifting off his shoulders as the world around him returns to normal. He stumbles out of the house just as it collapses into dust, the morning sun breaking through the clouds. The road is clear, the truck sitting where he left it, untouched by the horrors he's just endured. The mirror, now just a broken frame, lies shattered on the ground. Rick climbs back into his truck, exhausted but free from the curse that had haunted him. As he drives away, he feels a sense of closure, knowing that he's finally faced the darkness within him. The road ahead is long, but for the first time in years, Rick feels a glimmer of hope.